Because there's no time during the day that you do all these things. Your prayers have certain times, but these don't have time.
They don't have specific time, right? They're not limited to specific times.
Just today.
Right. But we try to do it.
That's a lot.
Some things we try to do, like the Tanya, or we'll try to do in the morning before davening. It's like chassidus, so things that can help us focus on prayer. Then there's, we try to do it in the morning, the first thing possible. Obviously, on certain days it works easier than others, but.
How far is Levi now in this?
In Tanya? No, he's not. Why
Well,
not?
no, when we started, you said
he
had done the first 3 chapters.
By heart. He was studying it by heart. Yeah. So, no, he didn't advance. When we first started, he was doing 3. He knows about 6.5 maybe chapters. But now he's focused on his bar mitzvah stuff. So
they don't do this at school, right?
No, in yeshiva next year he'll start.
He'll start
going, yeah.
And Maimonides.
So Maimonides. So there's 3 tracts of Maimonides. Sorry for those who are joining on the recording. There's only one couple. So we might go off on a tangent today. Excuse I'll keep it recording just because we'll probably get to something. But so there are 3 tracts of the study of Maimonides. One is 3 chapters a day to finish it in a year. That's the initial way that Rebbe set it up. But the Rebbe wanted to include everyone. And there were people that couldn't do 3 chapters a day. So the Rebbe instituted that for those who can't do 3 chapters a day, to do 1 chapter a day and finish it once in approximately every 3 years, 3 cycles. Now I have to tell you, there's a doctor here in Chicago, a doctor, a busy guy. And in 1985, when the Rebbe started, 1984, when the Rebbe started this campaign, there was no English translation of Maimonides, proper English translation of Maimonides. And, for many people, studying in Hebrew wasn't an option on their own. And so every night after work, there would be a class. The rabbi in Chicago would give a class and 3 chapters a day, which would be, anywhere from an hour to 2 hours a day. And there were many people, but I heard from this doctor, never missed a day in that first year. And when they were coming up to the anniversary, when they were going to complete the entire Maimonides, they were like sort of sighing a sigh of relief that now we're done with this. The Rebbe just didn't make it sound like it was going to be an ongoing thing. It was a one-time thing, And then when they finished, they said, "Okay, now let's do it again." And by now already there's English translation. And obviously, the more often you learn it, the easier it becomes, the more familiar you are with the ideas and the concepts, etc. But then also for women and children, or anyone that's literally can't even do a chapter, which today it's almost no excuse, even for women and many children, with the amount of podcasts there are, and the amount of material there is, it's almost no excuse to do at least one chapter a day. But there's the daily mitzvah. That's what we did last year, the daily mitzvah. It covers the mitzvahs that are studied in the 3-chapter cycle. So usually kids, Levi's included in a kid, he's still,
That's what it has all.
So
3 chapters, 1 chapter.
And daily mitzvah.
And daily mitzvah, and then it has all these other things. To do all this.
So we don't do all of it. I do 3 chapters. I don't do 1 chapter, but I do this, the Chumash, the Psalms, the Tanya, the Yom Yom, and 3 chapters.
That's a lot. Even though you can read it or listen to it.
Right.
So, like Dale said, it's great for him. He puts on his earphones and he listens to it.
So many times when I'm driving, every day I drive to and from Chicago. I'll listen to Maimonides usually. But by now already, truth be told, and this is actually what let's talk. This is exactly what I want to talk about today. Not generally, but the point I was just going to make is exactly what we want to talk about. So it's a perfect segue into the discussion today. So we've been talking about the fact that a person should be humble before every person. Humble before every person. How can I be humble before every person? I know there are people that are lower on the ladder than me. So we said that the reason you look at someone else higher or lower is for 2 reasons. First of all, you're judging the other person. You're also judging yourself. So you're putting the other person on one step of the ladder, you're also putting yourself in comparison on a different step. So the first thing you have to do, and this we discussed last week, was change the way we judge someone else. Not because we want a different result, but because the way we're judging other people is usually flawed. Because we're looking at results and not at effort. Yeah? So we're looking where they are action or results based on the ladder, and that's not what's important. What's important is where they are in their effort and their service of God. And today we're going to focus on judging ourselves. How do we know where to put ourselves on the ladder? If I look at someone else, okay, so last week we learned that they may not be observant, but it's very difficult. They didn't grow up in that environment. It's very difficult for them. So we're putting them lower than they deserve to be. Really, they deserve to be higher. But me, I do all the mitzvahs. I'm a Beinoni. I don't commit any, right? Because the Alter Rebbe was talking to, I don't commit any sins. I do all the mitzvahs. Why should I be lower than where I think I am? So the Alter Rebbe is going to say, if you think about it, you'll see you have a lot to improve to, even though you're a Beinoni. So let's look at let's start from the top, the first paragraph of page 407, right? So the first full paragraph. Therefore, every man ought to weigh and examine his own position according to the standards of his place and rank in divine service, as to whether he serves God in a situation requiring a complete struggle, in a manner commensurate with the dimensions of such a fierce battle and test as the Kal Shabakalim faces, as the lowest of the low. So they tell the story of in the olden days, it was very customary, the olden days, back a couple hundred years ago, mainly before Hasidism, it was customary for preachers, Jewish preachers, to go around to Jewish communities that were sort of simple and lax in observance of Torah, and they would shout fire and brimstone from the pulpit and basically shake the crowd into changing their ways. Now, momentarily it was successful. In other words, they would come, they would quote verses and prescribe hell for everyone in the congregation. People would take it to heart, they would cry and they would repent and they would commit to do better. But then the guy would leave and they wouldn't know necessarily how to fix it. There was no long-term effect of this method. And also there were people that were scared away from it. Obviously, this type of attitude isn't very inviting and comforting. So there's the story of one such preacher that once comes to a community, and he gets up on Shabbos at the pulpit and he starts lambasting the crowd about all the sins, and he lists all the sins that he's seen them do or heard that they do, etc. And he finishes his speech, everyone's in tears, and he goes off and he's happy he fulfilled his mission. Anyhow, he goes to his hotel room, and a few minutes later, there's a knock on the door, and he opens the door, and in walks the local shochet. You know what a shochet is?
The chicken.
The ritual slaughterer.
Yeah.
So the chicken knife is a short blade, like this big, but the butcher's knife is about this big. The blade is about this long. Yep. And the shochet comes into his room with his knife, and he's busy sharpening his knife. And the preacher's looking, and he's not sure exactly what's going on. So he says, "What's happening?" So he said, I was listening to your speech today, and we've always we've always felt a little left out by the fact that in many of the Jewish texts, it speaks about the greatness of going to visit the gravesite of a tzaddik. And in our city, we don't have a tzaddik buried. So we figured you gave such a fiery speech, you must be a big tzaddik. This is my opportunity to give our community a grave of a tzaddik. So he's looking, and he knows these people don't know much, and he's not sure if the guy is serious or not. So he says, that's not what it means. Anyhow, this shochet is serious. So he starts saying, yeah, but I'm not that big a tzaddik. I committed this sin, I committed that sin. He's like, yeah, but you're still a much bigger tzaddik than the rest of us. And so he starts listing more severe sins until he unloads all his garbage. And the shochet looks at him and says, with that type of baggage, you're coming and speaking to the simple people, and you know exactly what you're doing. You're coming and speaking to the people here that don't know better, and you're yelling and screaming at them. Who gave you the right to do that? Yeah? And he left. Yeah.
Yeah.
In other words, many times, and we tend to use, or I tend to use the example between religious and non-religious just because it's easier to, or the observant and non, just because it's easier to sort of measure from a, but really the same thing is someone who's doesn't keep all the mitzvahs compared to someone who keeps less, right? Someone who puts on tefillin may compare himself to someone who doesn't even put on tefillin, or someone who goes to shul on Shabbos to someone who doesn't even go to shul on Shabbos, right? Or someone who attends a Torah class, someone who doesn't even do that. We're always measuring ourselves against someone else. And today we want to try to reframe the way we see ourselves. Are we really as good as we think we are? Are we really as perfect as we think we are? Are we really as how would you say, do we not have where to advance to that we can say we are at perfection? And the Alter Rebbe is going to address 3 areas in Jewish life: Torah, Torah study; avoda, which means divine service, which is referred to prayer; and mitzvahs, in specific tzedakah. And Alter Rebbe is going to give examples in each one how even someone who thinks he's perfect, he's a Beinoni, right? He thinks he does everything perfectly, still has where to improve. Now, the Alter Rebbe is talking to me, he's talking to you. So obviously my type of perfection that I'm looking for is different than yours. Yeah. So let's say I study the 3 chapters a day. I have to look how that study isn't perfect and how I have to excel. You study maybe the daily mitzvah. You have to look how that study isn't perfect for you, even though it might be equal for the both of us. In other words, my effort in studying 3 chapters is akin to your effort in studying the daily mitzvah. But that doesn't mean that I don't have where to grow. It also doesn't mean you don't have where to grow, right? We can all increase in Torah study, whether it's in quantity, so whether it's the amount of time a day we spend on Torah study, or the amount of the in quality you have, the type, the depth in which you delve into the Torah, or even the effort you exert. So for example, at night you study, let's say for 10 minutes, and then you get tired, and you keep yourself up for another 5 minutes, for another 2 minutes, right? You put in a little effort, you exert yourself. It's almost like if someone, let's say the doctor says you have to burn 2,000 calories a day, and you have one guy, he's a construction worker. He burns off 2,000 calories a day by doing his job. But then you have an accountant. He burns off 300 calories by sitting by his desk and going to work, yeah? Now he has to find a way to burn those calories, yeah? So, oh, okay, we'll see you later. So when it comes to prayer, the same thing, right? Let's say you have someone that prays the whole morning prayer, yeah? But it's 45 minutes to an hour, let's say, but maybe he's looking at his phone here and there. Maybe he's dozing in and out. He's not paying attention to everything that's being said. His mind is wandering, so he could focus a little more. Then you have someone who maybe davens for 5 minutes a day, does Shema on the Amida, yeah? He can also focus a little more. He can also increase a little more. Everyone has both quantity and quality where they can increase. When it comes to prayer, prayer is referred to. Where do we know the mitzvah from prayer in the Torah? Do you know where we know that? So it says in the Torah, you should serve God with all your heart. Serve Him.
Yeah, all your heart, all your soul.
Yeah. So it says ula avdo, to work, to serve, be like a servant to God, to serve God with all your heart. And the Talmud says, what is the service of the heart? Prayer. So now, if you come to shul, you open the book and you read a few pages. Is that service of the heart? Or is that reading words? Is that service of the lips?
Yeah.
Service of the lips. So when it comes to prayer, even someone who's religious and someone who's observant, someone who davens 3 times a day, are they davening as well as they should be, as well as they could be? And the same thing when it comes to prayer. Are we studying, and are we investing as much as we should be, as much as we could be? And the same thing is with tzedakah. Tzedakah, a person has to give, according to Torah law, you have to give 10% of the income. If someone can and someone wants to up to 20%, a fifth, so that obviously we're doing. The question is, can we do more? How are we giving it? Are we giving it with a smile on our face? Are we giving it with a full heart? And the quality as well as quantity, we can improve no matter how good we are. So again, we're judging the other person by suggesting, they could be much higher than they are, and therefore we're going to put them down. And we're judging ourselves, we're putting ourselves higher because we think, I'm doing everything perfectly. And really, if we think about it, we have a lot to improve too. I'll just tell you an interesting story that the Alter Rebbe is going to. There's an interesting story of a Talmudic sage. His name was Reb Prida. Reb Prida had a student. He was a teacher. And remember in chapter 15 in Tanya, we discussed how a person has to learn everything. If you learn something 100 times, that's considered someone who doesn't serve God. And if you learn it 101 times, that's considered someone who does serve God. Because back in the day, before they had the written text, they would have to study everything 100 times to retain the information. So the normal thing was to study 100 times. That was normal. Everyone did that. So if you just did that, that's not working hard. That's not serving God. That's just doing what a person does. But if you do it 101 times, there you went above and beyond. That's considered. So this Reb Preda had a student, and the student was, for whatever reason, intellectually challenged. And it took Reb Preda 400 times of teaching until it stuck with the student. He would teach him everything 400 times. One time, while he was teaching this student, someone came in to ask the rabbi a question. The rabbi said, I'm in the middle of teaching, wait, and soon I'll answer you. And after the rabbi finished teaching 400 times, the student still didn't understand. And you'd think the rabbi would say, okay, forget it. I can't do it more. So he said, why not? So he said, because when the person came in and you said you'll speak to him soon, I already got worried. Maybe you're going to stop in the middle to tend to the person's questions. I wasn't paying as much attention. So the Preda said, okay, I'll teach it to you another 400 times. And he did. And after 800 times, finally, the student understood what the teacher said. So a heavenly voice came out and said that Reb Preda can either choose to live for 400 years, or that every person in the city should merit a place in the world to come. Obviously, he chose the latter, right? Every person should merit. So from heaven, he said, let him have both. What's the point of the story? The point of the story is that no matter how much we think, no matter how much effort we think we exert in the things that we do, there's plenty more we can do. If we just put our hearts and minds to it, there's a lot more we can accomplish. Okay, let's look here for some examples. So we're going to start with doing good, right? Because doing good, the Beinoni, remember, doesn't do bad, so he doesn't have to avoid doing bad. He has to focus on how to increase his doing good. In other words, how to look at himself. I may be a little higher on the ladder than I think I am. So in the realm of do good, in the service of prayer with kavana, devotion, for example, he must battle his evil inclination daily in order to pour out his soul before God with his entire strength, to the extent of wringing out his soul. In other words, exhausting all of his intellectual and emotional power in his devotion. So the person who's not observant, he has to start davening. But for the observant person, he thinks he's got it all. No, you're not exerting yourself to no end. You still have some energy in there to exert in your service of God, in prayer. This battle of prayer must be waged before, in other words, a preparatory to and also during prayer. As follows. How does this service work? He must wage a great and intense war against his body and the animal soul within it, which impede his devotion. It doesn't mean to literally beat himself up. It means they are trying to catch his attention, and he has to crushing and grinding them like dust every single day before the morning and evening prayers. This is before the prayers and also during prayer. He must exert himself with an exertion of the spirit, so that his spirit should not grow weary of lengthy contemplation on the greatness of God, and an exertion of the body, to remove the hindrances to devotion imposed by the body, as will be explained further at length in chapter 42. Yeah, so here we have in the service of prayer that the person still hasn't reached his potential. And anyone who has not attained this standard of waging such a strenuous war against his body, in other words, if you're not holding there, has not yet measured up to the quality and dimension of the war waged daily within the Kal Shabbat against evil nature, which burns like a fiery flame. So that this powerful evil impulse be humbled and broken through the fear of God. So remember the guy on the ladder that you put all the way on the bottom? He only puts on tefillin, he doesn't daven? Yeah, but you know how much he's fighting his inclination to put on the tefillin? You think you're all the way on the top because you're spending an hour in davening, but you're exerting zero effort. On the contrary, every little distraction that comes your way, you're being distracted. So the guy who puts on tefillin for 2 minutes, exerts himself, fights his animal soul, he's serving God. And you're at the top, you think you're at the top of the ladder because you spend an hour in prayer, and meanwhile, you're not serving anything. Remember the story last week, the rabbi who, the diamond dealer came to him and said he kept the store closed, and he thought about it a whole Shabbos. And so here you have a rabbi, he's sitting and observing Shabbos, but it's not a struggle for him. It's not challenged by it. Because remember, again, the whole premise of the judgment that we usually do is we judge results. We see, is the person doing A, B, and C or not? Am I doing A, B, and C or not? If I'm doing it and he's not, I must be better than him. When really it has nothing to do with the results. It has to do with the effort. And usually the person who's doing less because they come from a background where they had less education, they are putting in more effort to the less that they're doing than you're putting in to the more you're doing. Yeah? This is all in prayer. So too with one's kavana, one's devotion in the grace after meals. The last paragraph on 408. So too with one's kavana devotion in the grace after meals and in the benedictions, whether those said prior to eating or those recited before performing a mitzvah, all of which requires a battle with one's evil impulse, right? Even though it's only 12 words to say a blessing, but if you're thinking about the words you're saying, you want to drink the water and you're going to stop and say 10 words, 9 words. That's a battle if you're going to focus. Not to mention one's intention in performing a mitzvah, that it be done solely for the sake of the mitzvah. In other words, for God's sake. This requires still greater effort. And in this, one will surely find himself wanting. So I'm not any longer at the top of the ladder. Even though in action I may do everything, but I will surely find myself wanting. Because in devotion, there's no way I'm at the top.
Then really, in essence, to do kavana, I should read my prayers in English. Because the ones I read in Hebrew, I'm reading the Hebrew words, don't know the meaning of them. And no matter how well like the Shema, come on, I can almost do it from memory. But, unless I read the English words, then I am not doing kavana.
Okay, so
like saying a blessing before wine and stuff.
Yeah.
It's one thing. Now, those, I pretty much know the English of those and I understand what I'm saying. But when it comes to saying other prayers, like the blessings for studying Torah and stuff like that, unless I stop and make sure I read the English along with the Hebrew, then I don't really know what I said.
Okay, so there are two things. The first thing is kavana is a spectrum. In other words, kavana means devotion. It doesn't only mean understanding what you're saying. It also means understanding what you're doing.
Okay. So
let's go back 50 years before there was such a thing as a a translation to the Siddur, or 100 years, or 200 years, or 300 years. So I would say for the last, let's say 100 years or so, there has been, maybe a little more, there has been a Yiddish translation to the Siddur. So any person that wanted to pray and understand what they were saying, but didn't understand Hebrew, more or less could understand, because most Jews spoke Yiddish up to 100 years ago. And Jews that didn't speak Yiddish spoke Hebrew. So it was either one way or the other. But before there was translation to the Siddur, what was considered praying with kavanah? So in the Code of Jewish Law, it says there are different levels of kavanah. One is to understand the words that you're saying, but that's not even the deepest level of kavanah, because you can understand the words that you're saying just in a cursory way, but are you really thinking about who you're saying the words to? Like I could tell you I love you, and I said that emotionless. Now, if I sat for a few minutes and we discussed our relationship over the last couple of years, and then I said I loved you, it would mean something different, right? But if I said the same words to my child or to my spouse or to my parents, it would have a whole different meaning, right? So the words of prayer, if I'm not working hard on myself to focus my mind and think about God when I'm praying, and I'm busy thinking about what I have to do after prayer, then yeah, I may understand what the words mean, but does that make a difference to what I'm saying? I know what I love you means when I say it to the wall, but that doesn't make it mean anything. So devotion and prayer is more than just understanding the words. The primary idea of devotion and prayer is knowing what you're doing and who you're talking to. Now, many times, and today it may actually be, I don't know if it's more or less understandable, but definitely if you're coming before a king, if you're going to speak to a, I don't know about the president anymore, but if you're going to speak to a king, there's going to be etiquette. There's a certain type of etiquette, the way you're going to speak and the things you're going to do. Yeah, there are going to be certain words that you're going to use that you don't necessarily use to a regular person. And it doesn't matter if you understand those words or not. That's the way you talk to a king. What matters is that you know, generally speaking, what it is you want, what it is you're doing. So what I would say is, and I'm going to speak to you personally because I think this is collective. This can be it's not a personal thing. It can relate to many people. If I were to tell you, forget about davening in English, daven in Hebrew. Or I would ask you, forget about that. Let's say I would ask you, why do you insist on saying some of the prayers in Hebrew? What would you say? At the end of the day, you understand English, you don't understand Hebrew. Why is it that you try to say the prayers in Hebrew?
Because maybe it's more meaningful relationship between myself and God because I'm doing it in the language.
God's language, so to speak.
God's language, right.
So it's like buying flowers for your wife because it's her language, even though you don't understand. You think it's a waste of money, right? You don't understand what it's. I don't mean you. You may have an appreciation for flowers, but whatever it is you do for your wife that you find zero, you don't understand anything about it, but you do it because that's her language, right? So you find it meaningful to pray in Hebrew because it makes you feel more connected to God. It makes you feel like you're talking to God more than if you're saying it in English, correct? Did I understand you correctly? Okay. That's a form of devotion and prayer. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, we have discussed many times that although maybe the ideal is for you to pray in Hebrew, I think it's important that at the beginning, you do pray a lot in English. And even if you don't know necessarily what the Shema, what every word of the Shema means, you know, generally speaking, what it is you're saying in the paragraph. You know, it says to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul. You know that, right? So when you're reading the words, you may not relate the word to the actual translation.
But I know the meaning.
You know the meaning. And I think, and that's why I always liked the way you did things was that you said the blessing in Hebrew, and first you would say it in English, then you would try saying it in Hebrew a few times, but by that time already, you already know, generally speaking, these blessings are talking about the study of Torah. These blessings are talking about the things we do in the morning. You know generally what it's talking about. Eventually, one day, if, in 15 years, when the prayer is fluent and you've studied the whole Torah and now you're going to focus on studying Hebrew, then you'll understand the words. Yeah, I know people that grew up in a yeshiva environment, grew up for 40, 50 years, they will pray in English, or at least pray some things in English, because their mother tongue is English. And even though they understand what the words mean, they don't necessarily relate to it as much as if they read it in English. Now, sometimes, like on Yom Kippur, I feel more connected if I'm doing it in Hebrew. But sometimes I want to feel connected by relating to the things I'm saying. Sometimes I want to feel connected by relating to the other person's language. So sometimes you'll want to pray in Hebrew. Sometimes you won't feel it and you'll want to pray in English. Or maybe some parts of prayer you want to do in Hebrew, you want to do in English. But you know what all of this shows? That you're actually putting in effort into the service of prayer. The average person, and I say average not because it's overwhelming majority, but I think this is the tendency of people that grew up religious, grew up praying every day. The tendency is that as the years go on, we are less and less concentrated in prayer. It becomes more and more of a routine, and it takes more effort to concentrate in prayer, and therefore happens less and less. And that's what the Alter Rebbe is saying. Even if you pray every day and you feel like you're putting in more effort than the person who's praying 5 minutes, yeah, but his 5 minutes, his whole life is invested in it. He's not distracted by the meeting he's having in an hour. He's there all the way. And you're busy thinking about the rest of your day.
Yeah, because sometimes, you're right, because sometimes the parts that I've learned, I try to add a little bit each week or two, add a little more Hebrew. But I find myself, I read the Hebrew, and some of it that I've been reading for a while, like Shema, I can read pretty fast, all the way through the Shema, and then the first, whatever they call the first 3 paragraphs. Yeah. Okay, I can do that. But I find too that when I read the English, I find myself now, because I've done it so many times, I've got almost the English memorized, that I read it fast. Like I was reading, like you read Hebrew fast? Well, I'm reading the English fast, and I'm really not probably concentrating on the words anymore.
Very good. So now you have where to improve too. Right? So this is where we grow. We grow by recognizing the areas that we're not invested, heart, mind, and soul. Okay, now he's going to speak about similarly with regard to the battle. This is on the second paragraph of page 409. Similarly with regard to the battle required in the matter of one's occupation in Torah study. One must struggle to study far more than what is demanded by his innate or accustomed desire, by means of a mighty battle with his body. In other words, as long as you're studying and it's not a struggle, that's not Torah study. When you start sweating, right? If you want to walk, right? They say for exercise. As long as you're not sweating, it's not exercise. You have to start sweating for it to become exercise. So as long as it's easy for you to give charity, as long as it's convenient to pray, as long as it's enjoyable to study, that's not work yet. That's not serving God. The minute it becomes difficult, that's when it's serving God. So someone once asked the rabbi, how much charity should I give? A millionaire, how much? So the rabbi says, give until the minute you know you've given your share is the minute it starts hurting. When it starts hurting and you gave it anyway, then you know you've done your mitzvah. But as long as it's easy, it's fungible, it's expendable, you can just do whatever you want, that's not effort anymore. To study a fraction more than is one's want entails but a minor tussle. It neither parallels nor bears comparison with the war of a Kal Shabakalim against his evil impulse, which burns like fire, for which he is nonetheless called utterly wicked if he does not conquer his impulse, so that it be subdued and crushed before God. So here you have a person who knows nothing in Torah and mitzvahs, and he's still called wicked because he doesn't conquer himself. And you know better, and you're not conquering yourself. Yeah. And what is the difference And what difference is there between the category of turn away from evil, in which a Kal Shabakalim fails by active violation, and the category of do good, in which he fails by neglecting to exert himself in prayer, Torah study, and the like? Both are the commandments of the Holy King, the one, the only and unique one, blessed be he. So too with other commandments requiring a struggle, one may find that he does not wage war adequately against his evil impulse, especially in matters involving money, such as the service, labor of charity. In other words, giving charity in a manner involving labor, far more than his want, and the like. Yeah, there's a story of a rabbi who was trying to tell his students he saw the most God-fearing Jew in his life, and he was telling them what made him think that this person was so God-fearing. He saw him, I don't know, it was in the field or something, or in the forest. He was standing next to an older man who happened to be his father, holding an axe, and he says, "I want to kill you." He really got upset at his father. He wanted to kill him, and he didn't. And this teacher, this rabbi, was saying that here you have a person who wanted to kill his father. In other words, he wasn't a Torah, he wasn't the goody-goody in the classroom or the studious type. Yeah? And yet he held back his desire. He fought himself. When someone says they want to kill someone, they really want to do it. It's not just like someone who wants to eat ice cream. Someone tells his father he wants to kill an adult, tells their father they want to kill them, they really want to do it. More than you really want to eat ice cream. And so the fact that he didn't do it, you know what type of effort that took? We don't have that impulse. But that doesn't mean we're better. We don't have that struggle. But the question is, the struggle we do have, are we careful? Are we struggling?
I was always told, never do anything you can't undo. I mean, if you don't kill him now, you can kill him later. But if you kill him now, you can't undo that.
Yeah. You shouldn't do a lot of other things too, even things that you could undo.
Right.
But yeah, you're better be safe than sorry in that scenario. But then even when it comes to, so this is all doing good, right? These are all things, Torah, prayer, and mitzvahs, that we have to do, and we could figure out ways, even though we're doing them, we have to figure out ways to increase by increasing quantity, by increasing quality, right? Someone who prays the whole prayer, what type of quantity could he increase? Can't increase quantity, maybe increase quantity in time. But that comes together with effort, with quality. So for the Beinoni, for the person who's judging the other person, is judging himself, although he may be on the top of the ladder as far as results, as far as actions, he may be on the bottom as far as effort. Okay? And every person has where to grow when it comes to effort. Now, what about, that's all in active doing mitzvahs. But the Beinoni doesn't sin. And when it comes to sinning, it's not about how passionate I am or not, right? Either you did the sin or not. So when it comes to sin, there are things that are sort of close to sin, but they're not sin itself. So for example, we know there's a sin not to speak negative about someone else. That's called Lashon Hara. Speaking bad things about other people. So there's a story of Judah the Prince, right? The author of the Mishnah. He was with his son. And he came across a bill of divorce. And the bill of divorce was put together in a way that was problematic. And so Judah the Prince said, I wish people didn't write such bills of divorce that could be problematic. So his son said, I didn't write it. This and this scribe wrote it. So Judah the Prince said, why do you have to speak negative about someone else? You could have just said, I didn't write it. You don't have to say who wrote it. Then they were going, and one time they were reading Tehillim, Psalms. And Judah the Prince was reading, and he was using a book, a scroll, and had beautiful handwriting. And he said, look how beautiful this handwriting is. Now, his son didn't want him to think he wrote it, so he said, I didn't write this. Like, don't praise me. That same, the scribe, he wrote it. So Judah the Prince said, why are you speaking negative about someone else? Stop speaking Lashon Hara. Stop speaking negative. Wait, he said something nice about the other person. Yeah? But sometimes we say something nice, but it can lead to negativity. So even the person, the Bainani, who never speaks negative about someone else, that doesn't mean he can't find ways to improve in the way he speaks about other people that might invite negativity. So even though he didn't commit a sin, he may have invited that. So he also has where to be careful. Yeah, let's look here, page 411. Even in the category of turn away from evil. Yeah, so before we were talking about do good. Now, in the category of turn away from evil, every thinking man can discover within himself that he does not turn completely and totally away from evil. Because in a situation requiring a battle of the level, in other words, the magnitude described above, in other words, the battle required of the Kal Shabbatalin, or even in a situation requiring a battle of a lesser magnitude, for example, he may find that he does not summon up the strength to stop in the middle of a pleasant gossip or in the middle of relating a tale discrediting his fellow, as he ought to do, even if it is a very slight slur, and even if it is true. And even though his purpose in relating it is to exonerate himself, as is known from what Rabbi Shimon said to his father, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Judah the Prince, concerning a problematic bill of divorce that was improperly written. I did not write it. Yehuda the tailor wrote it. Where the slur was a minor one, right? He wasn't saying something negative. I mean, it was a slur, but it was a minor one. He was stating a fact. And yet, and the purpose was self-vindication. And yet his father replied, keep away from slander. Yeah, remember, he said keep away from slander even when he said something positive. The same applies to very many similar things which occur frequently. This is especially true with regard to sanctifying oneself by refraining from indulgence in permitted matters. So someone keeps kosher and he always makes a blessing, but he's indulgent in food. He's not committing a sin, but yet he has where to improve in removing himself from the negative. By sanctifying oneself by refraining from indulgence in permitted matters. And this is the biblical commandment derived from the verse, you shall be holy and sanctify yourselves. Moreover, even according to the opinion that this commandment is not a biblical origin, yet rabbinic enactments are even stricter than biblical laws. And one will often find himself succumbing to self-indulgence when the temptation is strong and requires battle to overcome it. But all these and similar matters are among the sins which people trample underfoot. In other words, we're insensitive to their importance because they're so sort of meaningless, we think, and which have come to be regarded as permissible because they are committed repeatedly. Yeah. So basically, I think we're at a point now where we see that we started off in the beginning of the chapter with the edict of the sages, be humble before every person. We thought, how is this possible? I am objectively higher and they are lower. And what we've come to see is, no, you have to push them up on the ladder and put yourself lower on the ladder until you're equal. Because you have to realize that you have to put in as much effort as them. So now we balanced out the scales, we're equal. But the Mishnah doesn't say to be equal with every person. What does the Mishnah say?
Be better?
No, to be of a lesser spirit. In other words, to feel yourself lower
so you can increase, right?
Than every person. So I could understand how I can equalize myself with every person. But how can I assume the other person is working harder than you or doing more than me? Yeah? And the answer is, and this is the problem everyone has with Moses. How was Moses punished not to go into the land of Israel for hitting the rock instead of talking to the rock? Why is it that family members or good friends will fight about the most trivial things you wouldn't fight with a stranger about? They're your family. Why you fight about important things? Because they're your family and your expectations grow, you have more demands, and the smaller things irritate you. Yeah, you might yell at your kids for missing crumbs when they cleaned up the room. You won't yell at your cleaning lady for missing crumbs when they clean up the room, right? Or you won't yell the same way. Why? Because you have different expectations from family. So now the person has to go a step further. So we started off, you measured yourself against someone else, you put them at the bottom, you on the top. Now we've equaled it out. But we forgot a very important point. Where does God expect me to be? Where does God expect them to be? That person was born, they knew nothing about Judaism. 70 years old, they find out they're Jewish. And now they put on tefillin every day. And you think the same amount of effort is expected of you? You grew up with it. God demands much more from you. So if I end up on the ladder equal to the person I thought was lower than me, am I really equal? No, because if God expects more than me, percentage-wise, I'm lower. From my perspective, we're 50. Let's say we're 50. We're in the middle. We're 50-50. Yeah, but because I'm expected to get to 150, I'm not 50% yet of where I'm supposed to be. I may be 50% on his ladder. I'm not 50% on my ladder. So even though I managed to measure myself to someone else correctly, and the measurements equal out, we're at the same place, we exert the same effort, we put in the same investment, we're equal in investment, which is what we wanted. We didn't want to judge results, we wanted to judge investment. And in investment, we're equal. We spend 24/7, our waking hours, we both spend it studying hard, praying hard, and doing mitzvahs. Yeah, but you're expected to be at 150%. So you're not at the same level anymore. Now you just got pushed down. Yeah, I'll tell you a story. There was the Alter Rebbe, author of the Tanya, once thanked one of his Hasidim for making his son, in other words, the second Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe's son, into a Chassid, or into a better Chassid, a better. I don't remember the exact language. Why? So he explained. It was years before that the Mittel Rebbe, he was the second Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe's son, was once talking to this Chassid, and he was sort of, I don't know if he was, he was basically telling him that what he was doing wasn't good enough, or wasn't. So the Chassid turned to him and he said, "How could you compare the two of us? When you needed to be born, in other words, when you were conceived, your father, the Alter Rebbe, probably had the most mystical of meditations and brought your soul down from the loftiest of places and gave you an education of a Rebbe. When my father conceived me, he was a simple guy. He didn't have any lofty meditations, and this soul may not be the purest. And I was raised in a farm town without Torah and mitzvahs around me, and I have to do business amongst the Gentiles, and I have to mingle with them and circle, to get their business and to be successful. And you're going to compare the two?" The Mittel Rebbe heard that, and he realized that what he was expecting of himself was nowhere compared to what he should have been expecting of himself. He was expecting of himself what he was expecting of others. The psychiatrist yesterday in the video said, modern psychology, what we know about modern psychology, or what the average psychologist knows of psychology, is projecting his own experiences to others. That's how we experience people, by our own experiences. Yeah. But that's not how we should be experiencing others. We should be experiencing ourselves, and judging other people for themselves, not compared to us or not based on our judgment. So when the Mittel Rebbe realized this, he changed. He became a whole different person. So the Rebbe thanked this chassid for turning his son into a chassid. Okay, so this is the last point of how we're going to make this person not feel humble and equal to everyone else, but less than everyone else. Even though objectively he may be exerting more effort and he may be more complete, but because more is expected of him. So Moses, no one will argue, Moses was the most diligent Torah scholar and the most observant of mitzvahs. Right? He wasn't involved in any of the crazy things the Jews were involved in. And yet he was killed. He wasn't allowed to enter Israel because he hit the rock instead of speaking to the rock. Page 413. In truth, however, if he is a scholar and upholds God's Torah and wishes to be close to God, his sin is unbearably great, and his guilt is increased manifold for his not waging war and not overcoming his impulse in a manner commensurate with the quality and nature of the war mentioned above that the Kal Shabakalim faced. So the guy in the streets, he's waging a battle. You're not waging a battle, so you're even worse than him. His guilt is far greater than the guilt of the Kal Shabakalim. the most worthless of the street corner squatters who are remote from God and His Torah. Because their guilt for not summoning up the fear of God, who knows and sees all their actions, in order to restrain their impulse, which burns like a fiery flame, is not as heinous, right? He just grew up in the streets. He doesn't know better. He doesn't know to try harder. So it's true, he's not trying harder, and he'll be punished for that, or he'll be judged for that. But it's not heinous as the guilt of the one who draws near, ever nearer to God, His Torah, and His service. Yeah. So you're comparing it to the religious guy who sort of wants to be close to God and is constantly striving to be closer to God. As our sages of blessed memory said of the apostate Acher, Elisha ben Avuya, because he knew my glory, said God, if despite this he still sinned, his guilt is far greater. Yeah, Elisha ben Avuya, he was one of the sages. It was during the time of Rabbi Akiva, and because of things that he saw and couldn't really understand, he left the path of Torah and mitzvahs, but he continued to study Torah. And his student was one of the greatest sages in the Mishnah, Rabbi Meir, and they studied together. And one time on Shabbos, they were walking, studying together, and then they got to the boundary where you're not allowed to walk more than 2,000 cubits outside the city. And Elisha ben Avuya turned to his student Rabbi Meir and he says, "You got to stop here. You can't go further. I don't keep Shabbos. I can go further. You have to stop here. You can't go further." So the mayor looks at him and he says, "Come back, repent." So he said he can't. Why? Because he heard a heavenly voice that said, everyone can do tshuva except for Acher, except for him. Why? Because he knew better and he rebelled. And therefore it's much more. Now, it's still possible to do tshuva, but God's not going to help. The average person that wants to come close to God, God says, if you try, you put in a little effort, I'll help you. But someone who rebels against God, knows better and goes against God, God says, you could still come back, I'm not helping. And without God's help, it's very difficult to change your way of life. And therefore, our sages declared, in regard to the illiterate, that deliberate sins are regarded in their case as inadvertent acts, since they are unaware of the gravity of their sins. So any sin a person commits in life and is a result of the way the environment they were raised in. So even though now you know, for example, that eating kosher, that eating non-kosher is a problem, yeah? But you weren't raised with the same, you weren't raised with a feeling of disgust for non-kosher and a feeling of, right, so just because you know it doesn't mean that God expects you to change in a day. And therefore, if someone eats non-kosher, but they were raised that way, it's even though they're doing it sort of on purpose, right? They know they shouldn't be doing what they're doing anyway, it's still considered inadvertent because it's not heinous, right? It's not out of malice. I'll just finish with one quick story. There was a rabbi in the Talmud. His name was Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon is known in the Talmud for the honor and respect he gave to his mother. And one of the episodes to illustrate his honor for his mother is that she was walking down the street on Shabbos and her sandal, her shoe, broke. The way the shoes were, there was the bottom and then the ties. Once it breaks, you can't carry it anymore. Right? You can't wear it. It's not like today's shoes you can wear without the shoelace. So she was walking 1 foot barefoot outside. So Rabbi Tarfon bent down on the street, put his hand under her foot, and crawled with her as she walked home with his hand under her feet. Yeah. So one day Rabbi Tarfon became ill, and his mother was alive. So his mother came to the rabbis and said, "Pray for my son, for no one like him performs the mitzvah of honor your father and mother." And basically what she was saying was, he's like perfect in this mitzvah. He deserves your prayers for a speedy recovery. And they said, even if everything that's said about him is true, it's not even half of what honor your father and mother is. In other words, if he truly accomplished perfection, he has no purpose for life anymore. He finished.
Yeah.
But as long as he's alive, that means God has a purpose for it. That means he has where to improve. As long as you're alive, you can improve. Even if you think you've done something perfect, you can improve. And so after this chapter, I think whenever we look at someone else or whenever we look at ourselves and we think, I may be good enough, or I may have finished this service or this work, or I may be better than this person in this area, we have to reevaluate. We have to evaluate how we're judging them, how we're judging ourselves, and how we're judging what's expected of us in relation to them. And then we'll see 99.9% of the time, or 100% of the time, we may be even lower on the totem pole than the person we're looking to and comparing to.